I'm a guy who lost my dad very young, and I didn't have brothers. I had sisters and a mom who was kind of perpetually grieving the loss of her husband. And so my male friendships were always really important to me, and they remain so all through my life, my bros. So I think a lot of that came out in this, and it's that bromance between these two men that I think drives the film for me.
Welcome to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies. Each episode, a brilliant screenwriter revisits their initial screenplay for what became a beloved movie, discussing what changed, what didn't, and why. From first draft to the big screen. Surfing into the Script Apart hot seat this week is W. Peter Iliff, writer of the astonishing Point Break. Peter was a Los Angeles-based waiter when he began work on this dazzling adrenaline hit of a movie about an FBI cop who goes undercover with a bank-robbing surfer gang. The idea had come to him while hanging out with the filmmaker Rick King, who helped him flesh out the story before Peter went away and turned it into the blueprint for one of the great movies of the 1990s. The resulting film, directed by Kathryn Bigelow, with a little bit of James Cameron fairy dust sprinkled over Peter's script, was both an electrifying action thriller and something that transcended the genre entirely, with plenty to say about America, adventure, and the bonds forged between men. In this fascinating conversation, Peter explores the connection between his own struggles with alcohol and the film's life-on-the-edge characters, always chasing their next buzz. He also details how the film's most stunning sequences came together on the page, and how the iconic end fight scene between Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze's characters was inspired by samurai movies. You might also want to listen out carefully at the end for a tantalising breakdown of a Point Break TV show that Peter's currently writing. You've met Joanny Utah, now get ready to meet Joanny Utah, his daughter. One quick thing to mention before we dive into the episode. Last week we launched our very own spin-off show, How I Write, presented by our friends at Arc Studio Pro, is a series of 22-minute specials in which writers, you guessed it, discuss how they get words on the page, taking listeners on an intimate guide into their creative routines. The first 3 episodes, featuring Misha Green, Jim Cummings, and David Gordon Green, are available right this very second. If you'd like to check it out, simply click the link in today's show notes. Okay, with that out the way, let's get into my conversation with Point Break writer W. Peter Iliff. Thanks as ever to our Patreon supporters, that includes Tracy Witt and Farley Reynolds. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Peter, welcome to Script Apart. So fantastic to have you with us. We didn't actually plan this, but we're talking 2 days after the 30th anniversary of Point Break. I mean, if we were meeting in person instead of over Zoom, I would have brought 2 meatball subs to celebrate, just the way Gary Busey's character likes them.
Right on. And we would have had a good time eating them. Yeah, Gary Busey, what a wonderful guy. He was just a lighter than life. I got nothing but good things to say about Gary in my experience with him. But regarding the film, it's been so cool. Like you have a Facebook presence because older guys, we're on Facebook because we can talk to our old high school girlfriends and no one gets mad at us. And everybody's been really sweet, and it makes you realize, oh my gosh, I think people genuinely do like this film, and how nice to be connected with something in your lifetime that might be thought it was iconic.
Yeah. Well, personally, I adore this film. Keanu once called it the breakdown and restructuring of a man and a belief system. Swayze's take on it was that it makes a statement about our society in the United States of giving up on yourself and becoming part of a system rather than staying as an individual. What's your take as the man who wrote it, Peter? Like, what's your summation of what Point Break taps into that's made it so enduring these last 30 years?
Oh, I suppose I can try to be, those 2 guys are, how can I put it? They're both lovely men. And, okay, you can throw something philosophical at it, but I don't know. It was just brought to me like by Rick King, who had this original idea. Hey, surfers rob banks. And my reaction was, cool, let's figure this out. It evolves on its own. The producer, Peter Abrams, had a phrase that I always liked about it. He said, "It's two men on different sides of a badge," and it's that bromance between these two men that's really I think drives the film for me. I'm a guy who lost my dad very young, and I didn't have brothers. I had sisters and a mom who was kind of perpetually grieving the loss of her husband. And so my male friendships were always really important to me, and they remain so all through my life. My bros. So I think a lot of that came out in this, and how I think men really do strive for male friendships and that connection that sometimes you don't get with your wives and daughters. There's a testosterone thing in there, and I that seemed to be a big part of it. And it's just amazing to see what filmmaker Kathryn Bigelow did, and how the film, you look at it and it kind of holds up. And because it was at the beach, it doesn't seem to age, because they're just wearing, swim shorts. I'm rambling now, so why don't you give me a better question so I can stop my rambling?
I'm glad that you touched on the kind of parts of yourself that you brought to the table with Point Break, because, well, when I hit you up about coming on Script Apart, I emailed you, and you were on holiday at the time, and you sent me back a photo of you on the slopes, and it was just nice because I was like, okay, there's an adrenaline junkie in you that connects to what this movie is about. So yeah, I'd love. Can you unpack for me some of the other ways in which there are little seeds of autobiography, kind of either conscious or subconscious, that kind of exist in this film that are taken from your life?
Well, I mean, I can get real honest. I'm a 16 years sober from drugs and alcohol. I'm an alcoholic, and alcoholics like to go faster. They like to eat more. They like to climb the tree to the top. They just want more and more and more. And so I totally get these guys. I was never the athlete that these characters are. I wish I could surf. I'm a terrible surfer. I can stand up on a paddleboard pretty good. Pushing yourself to the edge and going past it, I totally get. And I'm not a great skier, but I'm a good skier, and I like to go really fast. I'm proud to say I got my first speeding ticket skiing this year. For going too fast, just top to bottom, nonstop skiing, and so I get it. And a lot of it came out of that. And in my recovery, when I got sober in 2004, you're just around a lot of other people who you see are demonstrating these characteristics, especially as kids. It's the kid who would do the crazy skateboard stunts, the kid who would just do nuts things. And then you watch them grow up. Oh, now they're drinking, 12 beers in a sitting. Oh, I get it. Just kind of all dovetails. And oddly enough, in my, I've written a sequel that we're trying to do as a TV thing, and really dives into what is Joanny Utah's daughter. And, she gets an injury, and they give her Oxycontin painkillers, and then she's off to the races. And it's kind of like really looking a little closer at the fusion between, these adrenaline junkies. Because I think it's something to do with your dopamine intake system. Certain people just need more dopamine. And you get it, everything you do that you like, whether it be sex, food, or some kind of extreme activity that takes you to the edge. And so that's where I come from.
Well, I'm really excited to ask you more about the TV show at the end of this. But first, to go back to Swayze's point. So to Swayze, it was like a fundamentally American story. And I can see that reading of it, right? Because Joanny Utah could not be a more American name. And of course, the robbers are famously the ex-presidents. Although I think in the early drafts, they weren't, and they were wearing pig masks. And that's something that came a little further into the development.
They were wearing masks of presidents, of dead presidents.
Because that was always the case, was it?
Well, it's a screenwriter thing. It's like, everything comes from the egg. It's a phrase we use, that they're stealing money. Okay, so there's a money theme. Okay, so their masks will be the dead presidents, which are on the face of money, and which was a great idea in script form. But when you visualize it, Jim Cameron was really smart. Like, well, okay, have George Washington in the bank is not as cool as Nixon or Reagan. This kind of, right? So he wisely changed it from the dead presidents to the ex-presidents. That was one of the nice things Jim Cameron did.
But was there anything specifically that did you see it in the way that Swayze interprets it as a film about America? Was there anything that you were trying to explore?
Well, just what I was seeing. And, I came down from San Francisco, Marin County, and I went to the University of UCSB in Santa Barbara, which had a real, it was a beach school. And, so this beach culture was really a part of my life, although I was never a great surfer, just so we know that. But I was at the beach all the time. I'm 6'4", and back in those days, I was like, 170 pounds. I'm now 6'4", like, 225 in pretty good shape. But so I was a geek, I was a total geek. But I was around the beach, and then I moved to Malibu and waiting tables as I'm writing the script. And I'm around these surfer guys, and you see that they can't keep regular jobs, because if the waves come up, they got to be in the waves. So it meant they weren't holding 9-to-5 jobs. They were pretty much selling weed, or many were, this kind of career thieves, and not all of them, but a lot of them. So I kind of got this idea, and I saw it. And so it just became a natural, and I'll back up. There is a legacy of Malibu surfer thieves. These guys just, and even small stuff, just like, shoplifting from the grocery store to get their stuff too. They go to the party and they basically empty your closet and your refrigerator. It started with small stuff, and then it got more sophisticated. And so to think that these guys were, following their robbing banks to follow their endless summer was kind of a natural extension of that. And it really was that simple. I mean, I didn't try to, I didn't purposely go out to get really philosophical about it. It just kind of evolves with characters, quite frankly, defending their position, Yeah. And it was more about, I was more into the phrases that I came up with, like 100% pure adrenaline, and it's not, a tragedy to die at what you love. And just that was where I was going with it. I was going more from my own perspective of my alcoholic nature, I want more, I want more, I want more. I need my dopamine shot. My philosophical take was in that direction, of how you justify a life on the edge where you could lose it at any moment. And the rest, is for smart guys like Swayze, who's a lovely man. I got to know very well near his death. We were going to do Point Break 2, and I'd been hired to write it. I was going to direct it, actually. And, Patrick was going to, have survived the final wave. He would have hidden down in a sea cave, which he would have known very well where they were. And it was about him living in Indonesia and his sons. And they were involved in actually kind of fighting ecoterrorism. They were kind of doing a good thing. And so a new Joanny Utah, a younger character, was sent out as an ex-military, a mercenary hired to stop these guys. And the same story happens. Like, which side of the badge am I on? I'm kind of blown out, and feeling what these guys are doing is more important. And Swayze died of pancreatic cancer, and I got to know him better in the last years of his life than actually during the filming of the movie. During the filming of the movie, I mean, he just come off ghost. So he was literally on the cover of an American magazine called People Magazine that at that time was huge. And he was like, it was called Sexiest Man of the Year. And when he came on set, it was like the Beatles were on set. And there were literally ropes put up to keep, screaming girls away. I mean, it was, and I didn't really get to know him well at that time, but I'm very close now with all the other surfer guys who appeared, John Philbin and Jesse Christopher.
Yeah.
Jesse Christopher is a dear friend, and he is working with me on the Point Break TV thing. And these guys tell me stories of Swayze just being one of the guys, like, living in their little cottage with them, doing the stunts himself, which was just nuts. I mean, he actually jumped out of that freaking plane. Keanu did. Yeah. Keanu was, up on a rig and, all this. But that shot toward the end, when Swayze goes, he says his last line and he rolls backward out of the plane. That's one take. I mean, that's one shot rather. There's no cut. He really gives a line and then rolls backward out of a frickin' plane.
Yeah.
And I mean, who does that? Swayze does, you know? And so my hat's off to Swayze. And I do remember Keanu trying to beef up for the role. And you know, in the parking lot down by the Santa Monica Pier, like working out in the, in the open, and like had a football coach kind of showing him how to throw a pass, which, you got to be, you got to know how to hold the laces right. And he was really trying, because, he was not naturally a buff guy. He was like kind of like my build. He was a, tall, lanky, kind of goofy, sweet guy. And for him to go more muscular, he had to really transform himself. That was more natural for Swayze, as we know, who was a fabulous dancer and had already been in his Roadhouse roles and could kick everybody's ass.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, Peter, that, you were waiting tables as you wrote this.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for you from Misha Green, who is the incredible showrunner behind HBO's Lovecraft Country. I was speaking to her for a project I'm working on, and she asked who was coming up on Script Apart. I told her we were doing a Point Break episode, and she lost her mind. So this is a question from Misha. Oh. I learned so much from reading and rereading the Point Break script. What were the scripts that you read at a young age that taught you? Because I want to read those.
Oh, that's an interesting question. When I was first writing screenplays, I got into the Writers Guild in '87. So that means, it's the '80s that I'm learning how to write screenplays. Point Break was my fifth screenplay, or my sixth. Either one, somewhere in there. The third one was Varsity Blues, which got made.
Yeah. The
fifth one was Point Break. The sixth one was a thing called Prayer of the Roller Boys. And like all three of those got made, boom, boom, boom. And all of a sudden I had a career. So in those days, there really wasn't internet yet. So you couldn't easily, especially if you were outside of the business and didn't have representation, how would you get a script? You couldn't go online to get it. So there were bookstores. And at bookstores, you could buy these. There was a place called, I think, John Dutton Books. I don't even know if it's still there. I think it was on Sunset. And I would go there, and there would be, you'd pay for these, they were paperback, but they were like the big paperback books with Godfather and, just kind of the class, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It would just be this, one book would have maybe 6 full screenplays of classics. And I remember I bought 2 or 3 of these because it was really hard at first as a screenwriter to just understand the craft. Like, here we are. Like, how do you describe this right now? Interior, Pete's dining room, because my daughter just took my pool house office. I'm really, big screenwriter at the freaking dining room table. It's a temporary thing, I promise. But interior, dining room. How do you do it? How do you describe it? And how do you make it so that becomes a shorthand, so you're never really thinking about the craft as much as just getting the creativity across?
Yeah.
There's a journey there, and by reading a lot of the great scripts where you can see the movie in your head, and you can then see how the writer wrote it. And you want the shooting draft if you can, because it's going to be closer. It really helps. And then there's all this technique about, you really don't want to get into like extreme close-up and, telling the director, you don't want to tell the director what the shot is, but you can write short little paragraphs that imply that, and so there are techniques of this poetic terseness that we get in screenwriting, that we get better at. And within the world of your screenplay, your set of rules works. This set of rules might not be the same set. Mine might not be the same set that you would use. But in the world of your screenplay, I can talk about this stuff for hours. But
yeah, me too. So Peter, over the last 30 years, there's obviously been one official Point Break remake, but we've also seen like a lot of the spirit of this movie, a lot of the kind of character dynamics. We've seen them turn up in other movies, other franchises. The first Fast and Furious movie is essentially a Point Break film, but with cars instead of surfboards.
Rob Cohen's a friend of mine. He directed that, and he called me personally because I knew him, and he said some nice things and openly copped to it. And Rob recently helped me. I think because he knows he did that. He recently helped me with a work on another script that I was doing called American Thunder, which is like a Shakespearean biker epic, and which is going to get made. Rob helped me with that. So
that's some sort of payback, I suppose. Yeah. But it just goes to show you, if you had just done 9 Point Breaks, eventually you would have had Bodhi in Space and, all sorts.
Well, they're huge movies. I don't watch them anymore, but I can't argue with the money they're making.
Yeah. So from what I'm aware, Peter, you rewrote the film, or there were 3 drafts before the thing sold, right? Have I got that correct?
There were 3 drafts that I was hired. I was waiting tables, and I was newly signed by my agent, Toby Jaffe, at Leading Artists, which is now UTA. And he introduced me to a very cool dude, a little bit older than me, named Rick King. He's a writer-director. And Rick had this idea. It was essentially high school kids at Pali High who rob banks. Pali High surfers rob banks. And so with that really bare bones premise, I was hired for $5,000, which was a fortune for me as a waiter. And I started, working, and it evolved into what it evolved to. And so Rick and I share credit, and Rick was going to direct the film, but, was furious, but what choice did he have when Ridley Scott wanted it? It's what happens in this business, so he, the good news is Rick took the money he earned and bought a home that he still lives in today. So that makes us all happy. But they put me through 3 drafts like good producers, and gave really thoughtful notes. And so it is a collaborative process, and you don't do it alone. And if you're a writer out there, it's like how do you get that feedback loop? Are you in the writers group? How do you duplicate what a professional gets? Because just like with the new one I'm doing today, free agents, I got a 11:30 conference call with Lionsgate. There's going to be 6 people, if not more, on this call, just giving notes and kind of brainstorming. And guess what? My name goes on it. So there is that process in Hollywood of really smart people that you brainstorm with and who give thoughtful notes, and they don't put their name on the writing credit. That's what a producer does. They kind of make the writer, they're responsible for guiding the writer. And then we sold it, and then I was put through drafts at the studio level. And then because I was a new writer, they brought on Walter Parks, who kind of runs DreamWorks, and Larry Lasker, and their draft didn't really work. And then they brought me on to work with those guys. And those guys were really nice to me because they respected I was a new writer and they liked me. And then a producer named Linda Obst came in, who's I have no love for this woman. I just have no love for Linda Obst. And she quickly vanished, and that draft vanished. And then Kathryn Bigelow, who was married to Jim Cameron at this time, she resurrected it. And I remember, Jim Cameron, of course, now it's like when I met Ridley, now I'm meeting freaking Jim Cameron. Holy shit. And, Jim's cool. Jim is just brilliant, and he's cool. And I remember one day, the 3 of us went for a surfing safari. We just spent in the car going through Malibu, and he wanted to hear all the places that were my inspiration. He just wanted to download everything out of me. And as you know, Jim Cameron did the shooting script. So let's give Jim Cameron, the brilliant Jim Cameron, his total due. He really turbocharged. An example of what Jim did would be the lawnmower scene, that great fight. And that, I wish I could say that was me, but that's just the brilliance of Jim Cameron finding a new way to do something I haven't seen before. I'm going to shove your face into the blades of a lawnmower. So things like that, things I don't agree with, but he It was Jim having the final scene jumping out of the plane with a parachute. Now, I don't think that's humanly possible for a guy in a second jump to do, and I'm told it's not.
Yeah.
So now you're entering into an area of not being physically possible, and that was a line I didn't want to cross. But whatever. Some people like it, some people don't. Jim told me a story. He was flying over Spain. I love it. I'm in a plane flying over Spain. He's not an arrogant guy. He's a lovely guy. But he was like, I fly over Spain, and I had this idea that if you jumped without a parachute and I grab onto you and you've got one, I can't hold the gun and hold you and pull the ripcord. Right? I mean, I need three hands. I got a gun on you, I got to hold on to you, and I got to pull the ripcord. And so he came up with that bit, which was a nice bit of logic, and that drove him to write what I think is a kind of a ridiculous moment. But I am told by parachute guys that you need to do 80 jumps before you can have that kind of body control.
I'm sure.
You will go into just a death spin. So things like that Jim did, and the ending is a great story because the ending was always part of the original idea. That it took different forms, but it was always Keanu coming back and finding him, and basically you got to go down, and people trust you, and they died, and Bodhi coming, Bodhi getting arrested, or if not getting arrested, but the suicide wave, and because that was the samurai honor, that's where that came from. It was like all these samurai films, you let your enemy die with honor. They shot it, and Larry Gordon, it was his first film out of his new company Largo, saw this and said, I need a fight. And we're like, well, I mean, like it's this thing with honor. why are they going to fight if there's going to be, and you got to have a fight. And I think Kathryn reshot that scene months later, and it was a fabulous fight. I mean, I freaking dig the fight. I didn't think they could pull it off that well and still get to the point of honor and the suicide wave. And what the coolest thing was that Keanu had gone off to do Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So he had grown his hair long.
Yeah.
And, Swayze had gone off to do City of Joy, a Roland Joffe film where he played a doctor. He cut his hair short. So when they come back, they've now flipped hairstyles.
Which actually feeds into the film quite nicely.
It does. It's a wonderful movie accident. And it shows that Keanu's been looking for him for long enough for his hair to grow. And also that Keanu's character has changed. He's moved away from the bureaucracy and the protocol and the restrictions of the FBI. And he's now embodying a lot of the spiritual principles. And, he's learned from Bodhi. And it makes sense that he would let his enemy have death by honor. Then they hired some guy for $50,000 to take that tumble in that wave. It was like a contest. I wasn't there, but I believe the shot of the wipeout was shot near Jaws in Maui, if I'm correct. The actual scene at the beach was up in a beach in, I think it was near, Oregon or something like. The sand was a little darker, and it was not Bell's Beach, but it was the way up in the Pacific Northwest. They shot that.
The dramatic setup of this movie, taking a character and tasking them with embedding themselves in a community, like another culture, and then being seduced by that way of life. It's such a timeless storytelling setup. Heat uses it, Avatar, which of course another movie James Cameron was involved in, that uses it, Dances with Wolves. I could go on. Was this always the narrative shape that you had in mind for this movie? How early did that come about?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's an easy, it's just easy and it works. And so it's not hard to come up with that idea. So that was always part of it. Yeah. Then it's just, how do you get there? I was living in Santa Monica on 4th Street, and I had a roommate that came from Michigan, who's still a dear friend, and came from Detroit. And so we are these two young guys living in some apartment on 4th in Montana. Montana was kind of sucky. And he became obsessed with the beach. And this guy all of a sudden had surfboards and surf lessons, and he's playing beach volleyball. And it's like, he can't be on the beach enough. And So I saw somebody transform in a really aggressive way. It always became a bit of inspiration too, how my roommate Brian had become this like surf Nazi. I mean, he was still a banker, but in his off time, he was a surf Nazi. So my kudos to Brian Shear, my dear friend, who kind of gave me some inspiration of how people do get obsessed with the beach. So it was kind of fun to think he'd never been at the beach like my roommate Brian, and he was from Ohio State, he was back and but he's a good athlete, so this must be easy. And then he's going to get his ass kicked, which is just good fun because it's not easy. It's really hard to learn to surf, and you have to take a lot of punishment. So, and of course, every time I surfed, I always took punishment, so that was easy to write. I never got good at it, and all these things started evolving out of my personal experience with myself and the people around me, and just living in Santa Monica, which is one of the greatest cities in the world, and back in the 80s when it was less developed, had a undeniable charm, because it's a city on this huge bluff looking down at a really wide beach, and then you got Malibu to the north, and you got a lot of nice breaks in Venice, and it's just a real scene.
And how about like the intensity and intimacy of the relationship between Johnny and Bodhi? You described it as a bromance earlier. Is that something that was baked in from the very beginning, or was that something that you sort of introduced and started to sharpen in subsequent drafts?
No, that was baked in from the beginning, and it's another fun story. So I'm waiting tables. At a place called Angie's in Wilshire and Barrington. I was only working enough to pay my bills. Back then apartments were a little bit cheaper in comparison to what you make.
A little bit.
So I was really focused on this writing, and I get this job for the $5,000. And there was a waiter, an older waiter named Bodhi McCoy. And Bodhi McCoy is the inspiration for Bodhi. He was had a droll, cool sense of humor. Bodhi did, and before our shifts, we would have to get in early, and waiters, you have to cut the lemons because you'd put a lemon on the plate with the calamari and stuff. And we'd be cutting lemons, we'd be talking, and he took a fascination to this project I was writing. And it was Bodhi McCoy who came up with ideas like 100% pure adrenaline. He was the one who talked about these ideas of going to the edge and past it. He was older. He kind of had a little more philosophical nature than I did. Is that I was still in my 20s. I was maybe 26, 27. Bodhi really helped to shape the character, and I honored him because he was Bodie. And I honored him by changing the HI spelling, and Bodhi went on to have 9 children, and every once in a while he'll need a little money, and I'll just, how much do you need, bro? Because it's my way of thanking you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bodhi McCoy. And so it's these kind of things. Like it was just this, the universe comes together and it gives you information in odd ways. And you have to, like life, you have to be open to things. You have to be open to the signs. You have to be open in life just when someone is going to give something that you can use. And Bodhi McCoy was put there to help me write Point Break.
I'm guessing that you had Johnny as a character first, because we obviously see the film through his eyes. I'd love to know if there was any kind of like reverse engineering Bodhi based on who Johnny is and what his characteristics are, like what his desires could be, like what's missing in his life and what Bodhi could represent to him. Peter, tell me a little bit about crafting these now iconic characters.
I had Utah first, and his name came from my football hero, Joe Montana. I'm a big 49ers fan. In the 80s, Joe Montana was the man and had the coolest name God ever gave a football player. So Joe Montana, Joanny Utah. That was easy. Now, when you start to look at the FBI and Rick King, the director who had the original germ of the idea, was a very wise man. And he would just and then when I started to research, the FBI is I like law enforcement very much. I've gotten to know a lot of them, but it is a tough group. I mean, they're basically they're fueled by informants, and they have to like rat fuck a lot of people. And, at that time, there were a lot of Mormons involved. They were like short hair. You can't smoke dope. It's a very rigid thing. I mean, to become an agent, you're either military or law or accounting. And these aren't party guys. And so guys and gals. So it was easy to kind of think, oh, this is what Utah has gotten himself into. He's gotten himself into a bunch of people who seem to have a stick up their ass. And if he's a college football player, I mean, come on, he's got to know how to have some fun. And we do have Keanu Reeves. So, or, you always envision you have someone like that. So it became easy to think, what's the opposite of this, right? What is the opposite, and where would you go? And what would you be drawn to? And if Bodhi is the opposite and rejecting the 9-to-5 job world, and he's rejecting, the things that we're supposed to do, go to law school, go to med school, these things that our parents want us to do. And that's what higher education, which back then was a lot cheaper and more people could go to college, by the way. I mean, it was very easy to get into a University of California back then. You weren't, $100,000 or $200,000 in debt when you got through it. So there was just a lot of parents wanted kids in school, and they wanted them to have these big careers. And it was almost a rejection of everything that I've been told to do, because I was supposed to be the kid that should have gone to law school or go into business or, whatever. But my father had died when I was 8. And that's what allowed me to become a writer, because there was only my mother who loved me and kind of decided to trust me in my direction. And so I was able to do my own thing. And luckily it worked out. So I always related to guys like Bodhi who are doing their own thing. I relate to entrepreneurs. I relate to people who take a chance knowing it may not work out, but you're ready to put it on the line. And, frankly, as I am afraid, you stay out of the results. In life, we have to stay out of the results, because it has to be about our best work in the journey. Because sometimes when you get to that goal, it's just a lot of hard work. It's even more hard work. And you cannot live your life thinking that if only I was at my goal, I'll be happy. You've got to live your life where you're finding happiness and you're staying out of the results and you're not letting them bring you down. And you're shoved 8 times, you get up 9 times. It's like Cool Hand Luke. The guy gets punched, Paul Newman falls on his ass, he gets back up. And that's the thing with writers, isn't it? Because in our industry, if you have a hit film, they love you, you're smart. But if you haven't had one in a while, you're not smart anymore. And, and you're struggling for money. And I've seen the cycles in my life. I'm just grateful that right now I'm suddenly in a cycle where everything's skyrocketing up again, because I'm lucky to have a film get made. So suddenly I'm smart again. I'm pretty again. I'm sexy again. Last year, I couldn't get arrested. So it's just.
Yeah.
And so, these philosophical, kind of almost faith-based principles are what we have to do to keep ourselves sane and happy throughout our journey in life. And so I always loved Bodhi, because he seemed to embody these things, and he could show Joanny Utah some of it. And that's why I think I continue to get these letters from people saying this movie changed their life. And I do get letters like that, and I'm dumbfounded. Now I get them on Facebook Messenger. There'll be some long letter will pop up, but I used to get handwritten letters from New Zealand, and I started to realize, oh my God, how did I and Kathryn and Larry Gordon and Jim Cameron, and Rick King, how do we change the lives of people? That's a sweet thing,
You know what my theory is? I think people recognize the nuance and the complexity, right? So there's an ambiguity around Bodhi, from scene to scene, even sometimes within scenes. He's a cult leader. He's the most charismatic guy in the room. He's a criminal. He's also partly like a father figure to Johnny. There's some element of longing to be Bodhi on Johnny's part. And the complexity of it is just so much more enormous and so much more compelling, I think, than the standard kind of good guy, bad guy, protagonist, antagonist.
Bodhi's never mean. I mean, I know he has to get a little rough in the final bank robbery, but he's, you just like him, charismatic, and what a magic to have Swayze, who just have let on that look for him to grow his hair out and be in that physical shape and have a tan, and and just his initial meeting of Utah, just kind of making fun of the pig board, and hey, you want to play some football, and when Johnny tackles him in the sand. I mean, how many times have we all played beach football and get a little rough, and I love how all the guys bounce to their feet and get in Utah's face for when he tackles Bodie in the shallow surf, and he's like, don't you know who this is? This is Johnny fucking Utah, man. Swayze knew this, and didn't have to like acknowledge it to Utah until he had to, and he was, he saw himself in Utah. I think those are fun things to play with. A lot of fun things with these characters. One of the things about Utah was his sense of he will do whatever it takes. He will go to the edge and past it. In the original scene, which they shot, but you only see a part of it. He's at a shooting range shooting guns. The opening scene used to be him like going way too far in an FBI Quantico simulation. Like he just went way too far, and they were actually pissed off at him. Like, holy crap, Utah! Like, and it was this defining thing that Johnny Utah just goes to the edge and past it, and so you saw that character trait, which Bodie clearly has when it comes to athletic pursuits. So the film was already 2 hours and 20 minutes, so a lot of great scenes had to go. There's another scene that had to go, which I never saw, which I'm so sad. I tried to find it. Okay, it's the scene when Bodie picks up Utah, which will be to go do this, this morning surfing, the skydive. Goes to the skydive. On the drive to the skydive, Bodie pulls out a weapon and talks about, if I were to rob a bank, I would use this, and it's one of these eagles. This eagle, the biggest pistol ever made, is called Eagle. I'm saying it wrong, and there's a shot where he fires at a cactus out the window, and that is in the trailer, but the scene is cut out of the film, and he gives the gun to Utah, and it's like that moment where Bodie realizes Utah is onto him, because it's going to take him skydiving, and then they're going to say, we got Tyler, and you got to do this bank robbery. So it's the scene before that, and it's this great, if I was going to use a gun, and he explains how he would use a big gun because it would avoid the violence, peace through, superior firepower. And he actually gives the gun to Utah, who could just put a gun on right now and say, hey, stop, we're going to jail. And it was this kind of great scene. And anyway, I've never seen it. I wrote it. It was there. They shot it. It's in the trailer. And it wasn't in the kind of anniversary DVD edition. I can't, like, is it going to be, you can't find this stuff. These things were actually edited on, they were shot on film and edit bays, and you can't find this stuff. Nowadays it'd be easy because everything would be on,
Yeah. Well, here's a question for you, Peter. Something I've always wondered. There are glimpses of backstory in this film, and Johnny Utah at one point is talking to Tyler, and he says, all my life I've done things for other people. In high school, I played football because my old man expected me to. And he goes on to explain that after that, his parents were killed in a car wreck, and I just suddenly realized all my goals had been their goals. I hadn't been living my own life. So I wanted something for myself, something that maybe didn't make any sense. You know what I mean? One thing I've kind of always been curious about is like how much of that you believe to be true, Peter. Like, is that a sob story in that moment intended to kind of soften Tyler's defenses? Is he being a cop in that moment? Or is Johnny falling back on real life pain and trauma in that moment?
Well, and he wasn't, he used that to get to her, and she has every right to be upset. His parents were alive and well. I always think it's, you have a guy who becomes the star quarterback. And if you're going to become the star quarterback for the Ohio Buckeyes, you're all city, you're all state, right? Think of the pampered athletes and who don't, have to really be responsible for a lot of their actions off the field so I think you have a guy who could be someone who never really had to take responsibility for a lot of his emotions, a lot of his maybe ways with women. Obviously, you would get any woman you wanted. I never really put a lot of thought. How many women was he going after in college? But I always thought a guy like this would start to mature emotionally later in life. And so now he realizes he used his brain to do something which is maybe a little shitty to Tyler by saying he had been an orphan as well. And now he's realizing, wow, that there's a price to pay when you mess with someone's emotions and heart like that. And so it's part of his maturity from being the pretty boy quarterback who can get away with it all, probably, because most of them can at that early age. Richard Sherman, my beloved 49er cornerback, got charged by the NFL for sexual abuse. It's like, what is wrong with these guys? What is it about pro sports that allows men to treat women in these ways? What is it with this pitcher on the Dodgers, Bauer, who's like punching out consensual sex? Like, what happens to these men? So it's nothing new, right? We've seen it in our athletes who seem to have a carte blanche. So not to paint Utah in a dark way at all, but I just had to think, there had to be some lack of maturity emotionally early on, not intellect, not shrewdness, not ability to dissect a play and be clever and win, not anything to be a smart FBI agent, but emotional maturity. And I think that does come to a handsome man later as a woman kicks our ass emotionally. I know that was my journey with my amazing wife, which will be tomorrow. I celebrate my 32nd wedding anniversary with Ruth.
Oh, congrats.
Wish me the love of my life. I adore that woman. And but it was her that taught me emotional maturity. You have a good woman, they don't let you get away with that punk ass shit that guys like to do. And so I kind of think that's a lot what was happening with Utah. And in my 20s, I was going through that process as well. We're in the 20s. It's a very turbulent time before you're married, right? Like you're dating and you're breaking up and you're getting your heart broken and you're having your way with some woman and other women are just tossing you aside. And it's a lot of emotion going on until you find the relationship you're going to stay in. Right? I mean, I look at my son who is going through my daughter, and like it's a wild age, and I have the same kind of memories of it. And we all learn a lot in our 20s. So what Johnny was doing is learning, and I think he realized he really does love her. In my heart, in my mind, in the Point Break universe, he does marry Tyler, and they do have a daughter. And so that is where I think it went. I think that was real enough that it became serious.
So one of the most iconic parts of the film, of course, is the chase sequence. I think it speaks volumes about how exciting Point Break is. That chase sequence in the middle of the film where, the heist goes wrong, Johnny's chasing Bodhi. That would have, in other filmmakers' hands, been the climax of the film. Instead, it's bang in the middle. What can you tell me about the development of that scene and that moment where Johnny starts shooting into the air?
I'll answer it this way, that the film was designed to not open up on a big action scene. If you notice it's more character stuff. In fact, there is really no action scene for the first 40 minutes of the film, or something like that. The first one would really be the lawnmower, the break-in into the Santa Monica bungalow, right? I forget what, but the last 40 minutes of the film is one action scene. It includes that chase, but it's a nonstop sequence from the moment Keanu is thrown out of that airplane, which is a beautiful sequence, to getting in the van. It was designed to be that chase, as fun as it was, is just simply part of these dominoes falling and it's just escalating and escalating, and you keep having to top yourself. And that to me is the beauty. The actual chase scene is just memorable because of the technology at the time. You didn't have GoPros, so that was called a pogo cam. And Cameron and Bigelow were really brilliant in adding the point of view, and that's how it was written. But we had no idea how you do it. Before the '80s, you would have tracking, cameras on big cameras on dollies, and you'd have swish pans. But to actually follow somebody on a Steadicam rig was not something that was easy to do, especially at that speed. So there were other things like the bank robberies were really brilliant with what Kathryn does. There wasn't a master. When the robbers come to the bank, it's not a master shot. She has point A, point B, point C, and point D. So actors go to point A, swish pan to B, some action happens, swish pan to point C, and so forth. And when you look at it, think of that, because it's a kind of a master's class in filmmaking with the technology available at that time. And so Kathryn had to tremendously rehearse these actors to, on a big bank floor, get to point A, point B, point C, point D, and the camera had to swish pan, and you see the swish, and there's no cut there. And you see, and they got to stop at the cameraman's got to stop right at B, and it's got to be in the right focus in the frame to get that action. And so I frankly was more blown away by the bank robbery scenes for something you might not have noticed how technically proficient that what Kathryn Bigelow was doing. The foot chase is freaking awesome. And I love how it starts at the gas station. Well, no, it starts, after the sandwich, and oh my God, they're robbing the banks, and he's running down the middle of the street, and then the thing at the gas station, which was great, emergency burning of the DNA and all that stuff. And then eventually the firing into the sky, that iconic, I can't shoot my buddy, so I fire in the sky. I love it, but it was other stuff that kind of blew my mind as well. And frankly, skydiving and landing in water, how freaking cool is that?
It is pretty cool.
Come on, that is badass.
It's pretty badass. Speaking of water, we've touched on it already, but there is that incredible ending sequence on the beach. Johnny tracks Bodhi to Bell's Beach in Victoria, where the 50-year storm, this record storm producing lethal waves. What is it that's so powerful about that scene? Like, it's such a poignant and cathartic climax. What do you think it is about that is such a satisfying ending? Well, as I alluded to earlier, it really comes out of the great samurai films and warriors of honor. In samurai films, we'd be enemies, and I'd end up having to kill you and raise your son because I honor my enemy. Like, that stuff's just kind of cool. And so taking those kind of themes in a really fun scene at that beach fire, which was always part of the scripts, that they would that Bodhi had a vision, and he would talk, and he had a vision that the storm was coming, like he had a spiritual sense, and that gave us a real window into his soul when he explains his vision and how this force will travel across the Atlantic and yada yada. And so it makes sense that Utah's there. The way it used to start is that Pappas used to be a Greek, and Pappas in the original drafts, because I worked at a restaurant, it was a Greek restaurant, and that was the original Pappas. That's why it's a Greek name. But we took that out when Busey came, because Busey had enough to him. He didn't. So when you drink ouzo, it's you put 3 coffee beans into ouzo, and it's a kind of a white liquid. And the first shot is Utah at a bar drinking ouzo. And you know what it is because you've seen it earlier, because he's thinking about his dead friend. And then he gets out of the bar and you realize you're in Bell's Beach. Uh-oh. And, it's stormy, and he goes down to that beach, and there he is. And so it kind of gives me chills. It was like, and a confrontation where, there's
there's people in the cliff who are going to put you in jail. Why don't you come peacefully? And no, brother, I can't handle a cage. Just let me have this one last wave. But in Utah sees these waves, you ain't going to survive that. And so it clearly is, my brother, I will allow you an honorable death because I love you. And I know you didn't mean, you're not a stone cold killer, bro. I mean, it just went bad, but you got to pay. You got to go down. People trusted you and they died. So these kind of themes are kind of chilling, but if you are a man of honor, you have to listen to these themes. And so he lets them go surf the wave. That was how I wrote it. Now, of course, Larry Gordon said, let's put a fight in there. The fight became really cool. And I'm glad it didn't really destroy the deeper themes that were in play, because it was a cool fight, especially the handcuff,
Yeah.
And just watching Swayze fight is just the coolest thing ever. But those were the things that made the scene always special, and was very rare in screenwriting that we have the ending. I mean, we always had the ending. Like the movie is going to this ending. So it's always engineering backward. I wish I could be as fortunate to always have the endings of my projects. And I think that my advice to writers would be, if you could have the ending, it would be a better project. We tend to rewrite the opening 20 times, 30 times, because it's the first thing you see when you open up the script, and you're just always kind of massaging it. How often do you rewrite the ending of your script? You kind of like, maybe it's like, I'm just so glad to be here. Oh, fade out. I'm done, and I'm just saying to people, like, it would be better if we spent as much time thinking about the ending of our movie as we did the opening 10 minutes. And in Point Break, we had these themes from the very early. Every draft had a form of this ending scene. And then it helped, we're able to work backward. If they're going to be that kind of men that would respond in this way and give a honorable death by suicide wave, well, then how do you build that all the way through? And it became this way of properly defining, building your character. It just gave you a template, So, it's like I say, it's a great writing trick for you writers out there to have your ending first.
Yeah, absolutely. So the film was kind of badly reviewed at the time, Peter, but has now obviously taken on this huge respect. It's one of the best action movies of all time. It's regarded as one of the most beautiful, one of the most unique action movies, both in terms of just how incredibly shot it is and the characterization, the complexity of that relationship between Johnny and Bodhi. What do you think it is that alienated people at first? What about Point Break weren't people ready for it at that time?
I have many theories. I mean, yeah, it got like back then it had four. It was like a 4-star system. It got 2. There is one theory. The script was called Joanny Utah. All right, and the script was a very. It launched my career. It's what happens with writers who will have a career. They'll write one that everybody in town reads. So everybody in the Hollywood community had read the script, Joanny Utah, because it almost got made with Ridley, and then 4 years passed before Jim Cameron did it. 4 years. So it's a script that's gone. It's been, you're trying to set it up here. Everybody loves it. I mean, they really, truly love the script. The Joanny Utah script was less action and more character. All right. When you have the magnificent Jim Cameron, he turbocharged it, and that was his word. He turbocharged the action. So I'm very grateful. But I think a lot of the Hollywood crowd, and by this time, even a lot of critics, because there are blacklists, and these scripts make the blacklist, and people. I think people at first were offended that they'd taken a script that was very philosophical and more of a character-driven thing, and they made it more of an action film. I think there was just a reaction in the community. At least that's what I kept hearing. And then you have like an ending where the guy jumps out of a plane without a parachute. Oh, this is freaking ridiculous. And you started getting some of that. Whatever. I got a film made. It gave me a career, and I always liked it so much. And then about 5 years later, I started to realize, because people would go like, oh, you're a writer. Oh, have I seen anything you've done? Years when you haven't had anything done, it's the most embarrassing question. No, but I'm writing something. So then you get to the part of your career where you've had things made. Have I seen anything you've done? And they go, Point Break? And they go, I love that film. I would think they're just being nice. People are nice, and then it started happening more and more. Like I go to my wife, like these people, like this guy kind of flipped out on this film. Like, really? And and then sure enough, it started to become iconic. That play, Point Break Live. There were two troops. They were playing in like 11 U.S. cities. This Point Break Live play. I mean, it went on for years and years. I mean, it dumbfounded me how iconic. I mean, I was given this shirt when it played in Hermosa Beach, this Point Break Live shirt. For my 50th birthday, I had all my friends come down to a Point Break Live performance, and I was just so mad they didn't make me Joanny Utah because I'm 6'4", I don't fit in the wetsuit that they have for the actor they pick. If you haven't seen it, they pick actors from the audience to perform the Joanny Utah role.
Yeah.
And then they give him cue cards, and it's very funny because the joke is they're making fun of what people considered Keanu's bad acting, which I disagree with. I think Keanu was fabulous. So by getting someone out of the audience who can't act, it just makes the lines really fun. and I will say, Keanu did something brilliant with his acting in the film, which was he didn't say anything quite often. Like, example, when Swayze goes, "Oh, that's a frickin' pigboard," or whatever the line is. What is your friend from Kansas? Like Utah just looks at him. That's powerful. It was a choice.
That's a choice. It's a choice.
And I've seen that with a lot of good actors, because you have to write them a line. And I forget what the line was, but he goes, "No, I don't need a line." And he just looks. That becomes power. I had that experience with Harrison Ford in Patriot Games where they take him into the CIA, bunker where they're going to watch over the satellites as the, special forces take out a Libyan terrorist camp. And after it's done, James Earl Jones brings him out and goes, "Well, what do you think about that?" And, as a writer for a studio film, I have to write a page of what he thinks about it. Harrison Ford goes, "No, let's put the camera on me." Gives a look. And it's, superstar Harrison Ford, and the look spells it all. And so it's these kind of lessons that are fun to learn. Now, as a writer, you pretty much have to write the line and shoot it, and it becomes an editing room choice a lot. And Keanu had learned that, and I think that was what ingratiated a lot of his performance in the film.
Well, Peter, this has been so fascinating. But before you go, I can't let you leave without asking you a little bit more about the TV show that you mentioned earlier. You kind of alluded to a slight eco theme. You mentioned that it's about a daughter, Johnny's daughter. I'm guessing this is Joanny Utah, right?
Yeah, I've written a script that is really good. I mean, and I'll say that, I know it's egotistical, but you write enough where a lot of some of your stuff's crap. This is good, and it's good because I love the world, and we want to do something different that would expand the world in the present day. So we took, his daughter, and you see her in the beginning. She's snowboarding Olympics, and she nukes her knee, and painkillers lead to drinking, lead to wild sexual and fast driving and whatnot. And she bottoms out, has to get sober, and she hates being sober. You guys are all freaks and cultists. I hate you all. And you cut to years later, she's joined the FBI, and she goes to the beach, and she sets out in those waves, and she gets her ass kicked. It's a total turnaround. She can't surf, but she wants to learn. And as she joins the FBI, she's like her father, a real hard charger. And her father, Joanny Utah, has been missing. His body has not been found. He's dead. He's been missing for years. And there's a mystery as to where he is, which you're going to find out he's not dead. And a bigger story revolves around that. And she gets involved in these eco-terrorist movements, which of course now is a big thing. And there are two sides to the movement. There are those who are trying to get corporations, whatnot, to do the right thing to save our planet. And there are those who will put a gun in their hand and maybe rob a bank to fund their more violent approach. The FBI is after those people. And she's sent to go undercover, deep cover with a group. It's the same thing. It's like, which side of the badge are you on? She meets her Bodhi. His name is Cypress. He's a free solo mountain climber. And there's a lot of outdoor, stunts as the group bonds, and they pull these clever rat fucks of corporations who pollute our planet. And as she gets deeper and deeper, which side is she on? And the kicker is when her father, who is not dead, realizes that his daughter is in this situation, he has gone off the grid to be a mountain climber, and he joins the same group. And she cannot cop to her dad sitting across that dinner table. She cannot, because he's there to protect her. And now it's opening up a bigger can of worms because there were reasons he had to go off the grid. He did it to protect his daughter.
Wow.
So this is a story we have, and the problem is just very simple. Alcon made the remake, which did not do financially and was critically panned. And to this point, they made an offer to Keanu to executive produce this television series. And Keanu's really not to star in it, but to executive produce. And Keanu is, he's real busy. He just did Matrix 4 and now he's doing Wick 4 and 5. He's been doing back to back. And, there's really no amount of money you can pay him to make him do something. He's a busy man. So we can't get his commitment. And so I can't get Alcon just to do this. So I might have to just retitle it something else. And the title is The Wild Side. And just rename the characters, but in our hearts, we know it's the continuation of the Point Break story. But calling it The Wild Side as a reference to her adrenaline junkie, alcoholic nature, her hard charger nature, and the fact it is about the wild. And, something that's very important to me, which is climate change. And those people who do what they can to stop the Amazon from being raped of its trees and its gold and our planet. So wish me luck.
Oh man, well my fingers are firmly crossed that it all happens, Peter. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and a big happy 30th birthday to this amazing movie.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. I can talk about it for hours. I go off on tangents. Bear with me. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.